Welcome to Wizardry. In this video I construct the Tree of Lost Souls. This is the third video of my Idols of Torment build, inspired by the game conjured into existence by Blackmagic Craft. I intend the piece to be a dice tower as well as a terrain piece. This video is a bit lengthier than the previous and includes a lot of sculpting and construction, as well as destroying a couple of Dollar Tree finds and a Walmart find my wife grabbed for me. Thanks, Chrissy. I'd also like to thank you as well for coming along this journey with me. I do hope you find my videos helpful, informative, or at least inspirational to get working on projects of your own. The start of the construction is dismantling this Walmart aquarium decoration. I envision a screaming skull centered within a massive tree. The hole in the back of the skull will make an excellent spot for the dice to enter, but he's not exactly screaming. So it's off to the garage for a little surgery with the Dremel tool. Removing the lower jaw is the first order of business. While removing the jaw, I also removed any extra material that would obstruct the jaw from opening as widely as I wanted, while still maintaining contact with the skull as the jaw is naturally hinged. With the jaw removed, I trimmed any irregular or extra material remaining on the skull and jaw to give it the most realistic appearance that I could, as well as cleaning up any rough-looking areas where I had made any of my cuts. I removed the extra material here on the maximal, and this extra material which impeded the jaw from opening as wide as I wanted. From there, I removed an extra tooth and shaped the others that had been cut flat when separating the jaw. After that, a little more trimming and excess material removal to tidy things up. Not too shabby for a dead guy, I'd say. And he has more of a dynamic expression now. The last part of this first step was to drill some holes in the skull and jaw and pose my new friend in an eternal scream using some armature wire. Now it was on to my base. Considering that this piece was going to need to be sturdy, and I knew it was going to be heavy, and I needed a base that was going to provide a good anchor, I chose a 1/4 inch plywood. Once on the table, I started constructing the bones of the Tree of Lost Souls from tie wire, usually used in construction for tying rebar. I knew this would make a strong, solid foundation for the project ahead. I cut my lengths, bending them in half, and began forming the basic structure, using the loops as my roots, so that I could securely anchor the tree to my 1/4 inch plywood base. With the help of some small wood screws, I now had a standing skeleton for my tree. The tree I knew was going to have to be massive in order not to be overwhelmed by the size of the skull. It was also going to need to be able to endure some handling and usage if it was going to be the backbone and scaffolding on which my dice tower was built. So I knew I had a lot of bulking up to do. As you can see, this part was not the cleanest of jobs. The protective oil coating the tie wire made a mess of my hands rather quickly. But this was just the beginning of a series of messy steps to come. Barely out of the gate on this project, and my little skull friend was already starting to look at home nestled within the gnarly evil branches. And still, a lot of work remained as spindly wire grew to become thick limbs. Oh yes, one last fit test to see how the puzzle pieces were fitting together, and I have to say, I was genuinely pleased at this point in the construction and how things were turning out. And I was anxious to start fleshing out this monstrous tree. Bit by bit, the Tree of Lost Souls was coming alive. As I began stuffing and wrapping the tree with aluminum foil, giving form and character to the tangled mess of wire, I could see my vision becoming a reality. With the armature now covered, I could begin the papier-mâché process. My recipe is simple: flour, sheetrock joint compound, PVA glue, and water to the desired consistency. I cut my newspaper into varied lengths and widths, as well as random shapes and sizes. Following the contours in the foil, I worked the patchwork together into a nice solid layer, trying to get an ancient gnarled effect. The piece of plywood that I had wasn't wide enough for the diameter base I wanted, so I ended up with 2 straight sides. But I had a secondary plan. I started by adding some more screws for anchoring roots I was going to build. I then repeated the task of building armatures, filling and skinning them with foil, and now I had established my radius and had the basic form for the beginning of my dice tray. At this point, the tree needed more character, so I added hollow limbs. I could have built them into the armature, but I chose this method. I used cardboard tubes from aluminum foil and parchment paper to shape the features, and painter's tape to hold them in place and hold their form. I randomly placed and shaped them, and again covered my work with papier-mâché. I still needed a place from the tree for the demon I had painted in the last video to emerge from, so I grabbed a paper towel tube and some wire to make a knot of sorts in the tree for him to fit into and blend into the tree. After making a wire collar, I wrapped it in cardboard, taped it in place, and covered it in papier-mâché. As I waited for my work to dry, I turned my attention towards a couple of innocent bystanders watching intently on my desk. My wife's Dollar Tree finds. These two were about to meet a grisly end. Trapped in my garage, I went full-on Devil's Rejects on the pair, and ended up with a box full of goodies to add to the Tree of Lost Souls. With the work dry, I broke out the epoxy and found a home in the branches for the demon. He fit snugly into the collar I'd made. I thought he'd look even better emerging from the tree with a rib cage, also morphing from the bark. The demon was now more than just head and shoulders. The other skeletal remains needed homes within the branches and roots of the tree as well. A little hot glue here and there, and it was time to build the catch basin and delivery system for the dice to pass through the skull. I thought the rib cage and spine from the crow was my ticket. I also had the wings and skeletal-looking tail feather thingy, and imagined an ornamental crest, something you might see on the wall, or as a piece of furniture in House of 1,000 Corpses, or hanging in the branches of an old demonic-looking tree where bad things happen. The rib cage was not exactly a perfect fit, and needed a little coaxing, but eventually it did fit perfectly, and the crotch of the Y I'd sculpted behind the skull held it at the proper angle. I used armature wire to hold it tight and modified the hole in the skull. After one final tweak, I hot glued it into place. I then decided the tree needed more limbs, here and there. Once I'd completed covering the additions in paper mache, I added the cheapest one-ply toilet paper I could find. I'd soaked it overnight before adding it to my paste to make paper mache clay. I filled in any gaps I didn't like and any areas I thought needed a little extra sculpting. I had also filled in the crotch of the tree to make a ramp for the dice to travel down on their way to the dice tray. I then bulked out and sculpted the trunk of the tree using the paper mache clay. I then added all the skeletal goodies that I had left from the garage massacre. I used thin skins of XPS foam and hot glue to form the walls and the floor of what would be the tower that would encase the skull. The rest would be built with individual stones. So after cutting them into strips and down into block size, I placed them in a bucket with some screws and some rocks, shook it vigorously, and voila, I had my building material. I decided to use hot glue for this because I could bend, form, and mold the blocks into and around the contours of the tree easily using this method. I wanted a construction that in the end would look like it was ancient and in ruin, yet somehow also look like it might be erupting from the tree itself. With the skull hot glued into the stonework surrounding it and the construction of the crumbling tower complete, the tree was ready for bark. My daughter Olivia had given me some plaster casting fabric. I applied it, then covered that with the same cheap toilet paper I'd used in the clay recipe. I tamped it into place with a brush wet with a very thin version of the paper mache paste. Tamping it pushes it into all the shapes and contours, plus obliterates any pattern that might be on the toilet paper. And it softens any sharp edges after the paper mache process. Some areas I left rough, and others I lightly brushed to give a variation in the bark. I also kept some of the mixture a little pasty if I needed to use it as a filler or just add an occasional knot. I made vines around the crest behind the skull and the ribs on the demon's chest by rolling wetted plaster fabric inside of toilet paper, then applied more paste over the top to smooth it out and take away edges that I didn't like. If the vines were on a limb, as they are around the demon, I covered them with toilet paper to blend them into the tree better and to ensure that they stayed attached. And since the rest of my footage went into the cloud and not to return, it seems, here's the Tree of Lost Souls with a mixture of black paint and Mod Podge as a primer. I like how everything blended together and feels cohesive. I have a few touch-ups, but other than that, I'd say it's ready for a good dry brushing with some craft paint, and then break out my Nightmare Landscapes paints and washes. For now, I'd like to thank you for watching. Please like, share, subscribe. It helps out a lot and it means a lot. Until next time, I'm Wes, and this is Wizardry.